That's a great introduction. Thank you very much, Kaylee. Well, this evening, we're going to go on a journey through our gastrointestinal tract. It's a fascinating journey. It's a very misunderstood journey. And the old proverb 14 verse 6 says, "Knowledge is easy to him that understands." So what I want to do tonight, I want to give you an understanding of how our gastrointestinal tract works, because once you understand how it works, then you automatically have the knowledge on how to treat our gastrointestinal tract. It's approximately 10 metres long, and it's a hollow tube. And anything that goes into that hollow tube is not part of you or me until it gets broken down to tiny substances absorbed out of the gut and into the blood. Then it becomes part of you or me. And so it's almost an external environment is our gastrointestinal tract. And it begins at the mouth. And most people don't realise that digestion begins in the mouth. And the mouth is the only part of the whole of our gastrointestinal tract that we have a say over. We have a say over what goes in. We have a say over how much goes in. We have a say over when it goes in. We have a say over how long it actually stays in the mouth. And we have a say over the environment of entry. If it's a stressful, rushed meal, or if it's a relaxed, happy meal. And as you will see, as we go through our gastrointestinal tract, those decisions we make in the mouth influence. You see, the process that changes that food that was on our plate at lunchtime to microscopic little substances and then can be absorbed into our blood, then it becomes the life of the flesh, is an amazing process. So let's begin. So the first organ we're going to look at is the mouth. And the mouth's environment is an alkaline environment. And you'll notice that the only exposed bone in the whole of our body is found in the mouth. That's your teeth. And your teeth have an important role, and that is to break up or masticate the food. And there are no teeth anywhere else. So this is the only place we can chew. And the more we chew, the smaller the particles become, and then the larger the surface area is available for the enzymes to work on. And the more we chew, the more it breaks down, the more our brain is getting the message of what's in there. Oh, there's a bit of protein in there. And that allows the brain to connect with other organs saying, yeah, there's a bit of protein coming, oh, there's a bit of fat coming, yeah, we've got some starches coming there. But when it's chew, chew, swallow, chew, chew, swallow, chew, chew, swallow, the organs are waiting and they're saying to the brain, what's going on? And the brain says, I don't know. They're eating so fast, we're not sure what's in there. So chew, chew, chew. You might have heard the old saying, we should drink our food and chew our drinks. And we encourage our guests at our health retreat when they're having their juices to take a mouthful and chew their juice, or mix it with their saliva, warm it up a little bit, ready for the stomach. And so with food, we should chew it until it's almost a cream. And that makes it so much easier all the way down the gastrointestinal tract. I always think it's a funny thing that we rush our meals because we love eating. I mean, it's a delightful thing to do, so why do we rush it? Some people say, well, I had these brothers, and if I didn't eat quickly, I had to give them my food. Yeah, but you're not in that environment anymore. So chew, chew, chew. There's two foods that are digested, or the digestion begins in the mouth, and one is starch. sometimes called carbohydrates. And the enzyme that breaks down the starch in the mouth is a salivary amylase called ptyalin. And ptyalin is not present in the human mouth until the molars come through. We touched on this when we looked at child nutrition last night. So the first teeth that we get is 4 at the top, 4 at the bottom. They're called milk teeth because that's predominantly what the little one should be having, is milk. It's also taste time. I used to give my baby a little bit of celery to chew on while we had our meal, or a bit of apple or a bit of cucumber. Best first food is raw food, and that teaches and encourages the child to chew. But you'll find there'll be lots of little cucumber on the tray and lots of little cucumber on the floor, and a few bits go in. It's just taste time because their main food is milk. The next teeth that come through are the molars. They come through at the back here. They're the grinders. What do we grind? We grind grain. And when the molars are fully through, anywhere between 14 and 22 months of age, then the ptyalin is released from the glands in the mouth. So no baby should be given starch until the molars are fully through. Now, this is totally opposite to what most parents are told. Most parents are told from 6 months of age, even 4 months, give the baby rice cereal. Is that right? What's rice cereal? It's pure starch. And it sounds attractive because the parents are told, give the baby some rice cereal of an evening and they'll sleep through the night. That sounds attractive. They'll sleep through the night because they're knocked out. They've got this lump in their gut that's very difficult to break down. And often, gastrointestinal tract problems can start from such things. One mother said, but I'm told that breast milk doesn't have enough iron in it in the second 6 months of life. Not the same as the first 6 months of life. Well, I've got a question now. Has God made a mistake? Does God make mistakes? He does not make mistakes. And so the Nursing Mother Association, they quoted a study that was done. They gave a group of babies the same iron in the second, going into the second 6 months as they had in the first 6 months, so they supplement it with iron. And all the babies got diarrhoea. You see, you look at the growth of a baby from 0 to 6 months, from 6 months to 12 months, and the growth in that first 6 months is so much more. God doesn't make mistakes. Obviously, the iron requirements in the first 6 months are greater than in the 6 months. I didn't give my babies food until they could sit, till they could feed themselves. Did you hear that? And they had teeth to chew it. Is that common sense? Yes, that is common sense. One lady said, my baby's reaching for the food. I said, they'll reach for anything. They'll suck on their big toes. It's just the way they try things. And so the starch digestion begins in the mouth. Another reason why we must chew very, very well. There is another food that the digestion begins in the mouth, and that is saturated fat. So let's define saturated fat. Saturated fat is found in the coconut, butter, shea butter, palm oil. You'll find a little bit of saturated fat in the macadamia nut and a little bit in avocado. And the saturated fat, its breakdown begins in the mouth. No other fat is like that. As we go down our gastrointestinal tract, we'll see that. Underneath the tongue, there are sublingual glands, and those sublingual glands release lingual lipase. And lingual lipase is the enzyme that breaks down saturated fat. So saturated fat is unique in that the breakdown begins in the mouth. And it's only really probably the last 20 years that researchers are starting to see that saturated fat's not the enemy. Remember what we were told from about the 90s? Don't stop eating saturated fat, it'll give you a heart disease. Strokes, people stopped eating it. Did it reduce heart disease? Not at all. Not at all. And people have been eating it for centuries. It's actually an amazing oil because the breakdown begins in the mouth. So now we come on down our esophagus and we see a little valve at the top of our stomach called the cardiac sphincter. It's called the cardiac sphincter because of its nearness, closeness, or relation to the cardiac muscle. And many a ER nurse or doctor will tell you someone comes in thinking they're having a heart attack, and it's actually reflux because the pain is in that same area. What's reflux? Reflux is the acid coming up into the esophagus. It's also called heartburn or GERD. Is the problem the acid? No, the problem's not the acid at all because the stomach should be acid. If someone says to me, I've got a very acid stomach, I say, fantastic, it's supposed to be. You'll be digesting your food well. You see, dogs have 10 times the hydrochloric acid of humans, and have you seen what dogs eat? My daughter's dog brought this part of a dead cow into the yard, you know, with the smell. The dog's eating it and the dog's not dying. That's because dogs have 10 times the hydrochloric acid as humans. And hydrochloric acid is a very strong antimicrobial, antifungal, antibacteria enzyme. In fact, in my book, Self-Heal by Design, I've got a chapter called The Stomach's Secret Weapon, Hydrochloric Acid. No, the stomach should be acid. So if someone has heartburn or reflux, to take antacids, it defies reason. Because if you stop your acid, what's going to break your protein down now? No, the problem's not the acid. The problem's the gate. Now, God designed our bodies with a double-layered gate there to ensure that the acid doesn't come up. So if it's coming up, why is it coming up? It's coming up because that little gate has been weakened. So what would weaken it? Eating the largest meal at the end of the day. Did you know when the sun goes down, our whole body knows, and digestion slows down, everything slows down? In Australia, and I think a lot in America, a lot of people eat breakfast like a pauper and lunch like a pauper, and supper is the king and the queen together, is that right? And yet what we should be eating is breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, and tea like a pauper. A lady said, what do paupers eat? I said, sometimes nothing. So when you eat that large meal at the end of the day, it's very difficult for the stomach to digest it. And so it doesn't all get digested by the time the person lays down to go to sleep. And when they lay down to go to sleep, gravity pushes that food against the cardiac sphincter, weakening it. Now, it's not the odd day you have dinner with friends, but it's every day, every day, every day, every week, every month, every year, weakening that cardiac sphincter. The cardiac sphincter is a muscle. It's like this. And when that muscle tightens, it opens. When that muscle's relaxed, it's closed. So someone's stressed. And often when people get reflux, it gets worse when they're stressed. Because when you're stressed, your muscles tighten and that muscle opens and up it can come. Now, a lot of people suffer stress today. We've got stressful society and they don't have reflux. No, it's usually a whole lot of little things. If a person's nibbling all day long and eating their largest meal at the end of the day, if a person's drinking with their meals and diluting their hydrochloric acid so the food starts to ferment and then the fumes come up from there, if the person's stressed, can you see it in all of those things? And it's usually week after week after month after month after year, like the dripping tap on a stone, weakening that cardiac sphincter. And so to heal from GERDs, reflux, heartburn, eat most of your food at breakfast and at lunch. Chew it very well. It's very kind to your stomach when you chew well. And take magnesium. Magnesium is the ultimate muscle relaxant. And so take a little magnesium at every meal and also just before bed. Just ensure that that muscle is relaxed and closed. We had a guest attend our program who had an ulcerated esophagus. She'd had reflux for so long that the acid was eating away at her esophagus. And so we gave her a very nice drink. It's called slippery elm. And slippery elm is the powdered bark of the slippery elm tree. You're living in a country where it's easiest to get because it's an American tree. When you mix water with slippery elm, it goes like a soft jelly. If it's too thick, add a bit more water. And when you drink that, it coats, soothes, heals the lining of the gut. Slippery elm contains a growth stimulant, so it can stimulate rapid healing in the lining of the gastrointestinal tract, all the way down, as you'll see as we go down our gastrointestinal tract. So now we're going through the cardiac sphincter, and we come to our next main organ, which is stomach. And the stomach is the only part of the body that is acid. And if someone says to me, I have a very acid stomach, I say, congratulations, you must be digesting your food well. You must be digesting your food very quickly. But I say, how do you know it's acid? They say, well, it hurts. Well, it's not the acid, it's the lining of the stomach. You see, the stomach is lined with big folds like this. And these folds are lined with glands. And 2/3 of those glands are mucus. Mucus is 99% water. So if a person's dehydrated, often that mucosa lining can be very thin. And if you're well hydrated and you've got a nice thick mucosa lining your stomach, you won't feel your hydrochloric acid. So the two reasons people tell me they've got an acid stomach is if it burns or hurts, or if it's coming up. And again, the problem's not the acid, the problem's the gate. And you can strengthen that gate with the magnesium and also choosing when you eat. There are glands down here called the parietal glands. And these parietal glands are the glands that release hydrochloric acid. They also release pepsinogen. And pepsinogen and hydrochloric acid unite in the stomach to release pepsin. And pepsin is the enzyme that breaks down protein. There's only one food that's broken down in the stomach, and that's protein. And protein is broken down under the action of pepsin. But there are a few things that must be present for this to take place. So hydrochloric acid and pepsin, they only unite in a very acid environment. So if a person's drinking with their meals, what's water going to do to acid? It dilutes it. If a person's eating every couple of hours, they exhaust these enzymes. If someone's stressed with their meals, that's why no controversial subjects to be discussed at the meal table. Keep that till later because it'll block the release of the hydrochloric acid. The current figures are that most people over the age of 50, their hydrochloric acid levels are dropping. Is it because of age? No, it's not because of age. It's because they've been eating all day long most of their life. They've been drinking with their meals. They're stressed and rushing. We should sit, when we sit to dine, we should, as one writer said, we should cast off care and anxious thought when we sit to dine. That's why if ever we sat to the table and the child or the little one started crying because they didn't like something, out, straight away, quick, out the door, shut the door. Now we can eat. And if you only feed them at meal times and they're hungry, guess where they want to be? Back. So you don't want to upset the digestion of the people at the table. So it's very important to drink between meals. And if you leave your meals 5-6 hours apart, you've got a lot of time to drink. We should stop drinking half an hour before the meal and then resume drinking 1.5 to 2 hours after the meal. If you sit to your meal well hydrated, you will not need to drink with your meals. You can test that on yourself. It was probably about 10 years ago, I asked Amazon to find me a book. I'd heard this book referred to. It was written in 1844, and Amazon found it for me in a library, a college library in the southern states of America. Charged me 20 cents, cost me $20 by the time I got it. It's Observations on the Physiology of Digestion by Dr. William Beaumont. The first third of the book is the story. It's an amazing story. So we're looking at probably the very early 1800s. A young man, 18-year-old man named Alexis St. Martin, sustained a gunshot wound to the stomach. It was an accident in a trading store. Dr. Beaumont was only 25 at the time, and he was asked to come and assess the young man who had his part of his side blown out. And Dr. Beaumont assessed that this young man wouldn't live. They took him to hospital, cleaned him up as best they could, but every day he was getting better. And this young man eventually healed. But ever after, he had a little hole in his stomach. It was like a mouth, the way it had healed, and it had a little flap of skin over it. And the book that I have has a pencil drawing of this hole in his stomach. It probably sat about here, the hole in the stomach. And Dr. Beaumont saw his opportunity. And he asked Alexis St. Martin to come to his house and help him in his home. And he started doing experiments. He'd get a piece of silk thread, put a bit of food on it and put it in the hole. Pull it out an hour later, put it back in. Pull it out 2 hours later, put it back in. And Dr. Beaumont meticulously documented the findings of his experiments. Alexis St. Martin ended up marrying, having children, and lived till he was well into his 80s. Dr. Beaumont thinks he would have lived longer if he hadn't hit the alcohol. But what we find fascinating were his findings. His findings changed the nutrition world. And he found that there were 5 things that kept the food in the stomach longer. In fact, kept the food in the stomach sometimes up to 8 hours. One was if he overate. Dr. Beaumont came to the conclusion that there's only so many digestive enzymes released in the stomach. And if too much food is put into the stomach, 8 hours later there can still be some of that meal in the stomach. How many people feel like eating an evening meal on the 25th of December? Not many. I know when I was a child, it was the only time of the year we ate chicken. It was the only time of the year we ate ham. It was the only time of the year we ate nuts. It was the only time of the year we ate Christmas pudding. So yes, we ate much more than we usually ate. I find it interesting now because there's almost no treats today. Isn't that true? Everything's available on here. But I think still people, when they get together, the meal is rich and they graze for a long time. But they're not interested in an evening meal because the poor old stomach is trying very hard to get through that overload of food. Whenever Alexis St. Martin drank with his meals. And when I say drunk with his meals, I'm talking about large amounts. If someone's thirsty with the meal, a mouthful's not going to make much of a difference. But taking large glasses of water with the meal, what happens is, and Dr. Beaumont had the incredible opportunity to look at this, hands-on almost. It's almost as if the water comes in, digestion has to stop, and the water has to be taken out to bring the acidity back to the only acidity that the enzymes can work. And that, of course, delays digestion. Also, if he often ate. Now, last night we talked about time-restricted eating, how it's probably the craze of eating at the moment, which is eating twice in 24 hours, 6 hours apart. And they're finding that diabetics are getting better blood sugar level results by eating that way. And what have diabetics been told for the last 30, 40 years? Eat graze all day long. But it actually defies reason when you understand the physiology of digestion. The fact is that digestion takes approximately 3.5 to 4 hours to digest a meal. I'm not talking about a meal of watermelon. Obviously, that'll be gone in about an hour. But when you look at a meal that contains fibre, proteins and fats, it takes approximately 3.5 to 4 hours to digest a meal. So if someone's eaten a meal like that, and after 2 hours they say, I'm hungry, the body cannot often distinguish between thirst and hunger. So it's usually thirst. So when my husband says a few hours after the meal, I'm feeling hungry, I say, it must be one of the body's many cries for water. It's the title of a book. I remember Peter, my son, I think he was 15 at the time, you know, because my kids, if they said, I'm hungry, I say, have a glass of water, have a glass of water. And he came to me one day and he said, Mum, the water's not doing it anymore. And I looked at my clock and said, great, it's lunchtime. And that's what you'll find. When the water's not doing it anymore, it usually is hunger. And I think that's why a lot of people do eat little bits, because that thirst signal, they're interpreting it for hunger. Now, digestion takes 3.5 to 4 hours, and then the stomach loves a 1 hour rest. In that 1 hour rest, it allows it to fully replace those digestive enzymes that are stored in the parietal glands. Let me show you what happens when someone eats that often. So I'm going to magnify it because I think my stomach that I have drawn is a little bit small for the people up the back. So here is stomach. And it has a little valve at the bottom of the stomach called the pylorus sphincter. And that pylorus sphincter, when we wake up in the morning, it's open. That's why having water first thing in the morning is the best thing you can do. It's taken all through the body. But when you smell food, when you think food, see food, and the digestive juices begin, then that pyloric sphincter shuts. And the food comes in. Some people say, well, you should eat all your raw first. And I've even heard some people say, and then leave half an hour and then have the rest of the food. Oh, that doesn't make any sense to me at all. I want to eat my meal and then I've got things to do. Do you know what the fact is? That pyloric sphincter is shut and the food all gets mixed up together. That's one of the things the stomach does. It massages and moves that food around. And just imagine if I've got some men out in the paddock, or you call it a field, doing the fencing, and they come in for breakfast, and I say, look, we'll just give you the fruit, and then can you just wait out there for half an hour, and then we'll come and we'll have the sourdough toast and lentils or the milk. What are they going to say to you? Listen, lady, we got work to do. You just want to eat our meal and get on to work. It is true that when the raw food goes in first, it is a great stimulator for the digestive juices. But did you know that if protein is taken in the first few mouthfuls, it stimulates the release of gastrin, and gastrin stimulates the release of your hydrochloric acid and pepsinogen. So really, yes, some raw, but also a little bit of protein. I like to do a little bit of it all. In fact, I love my first few mouthfuls to be either an apple or I had the most delicious grapefruit that someone gave Tina this morning. And with that, I have chia seeds and I'm eating an almond. So there's my protein, there's my raw. That's great for the first few mouthfuls. But what happens if a person has their breakfast and maybe it's just a bowl of cereal, and I have to tell you, that doesn't take you very far. And the food's coming down here, and the pyloric sphincter gets the message, yes, it's starting to be broken down, we can start going through. And then about 10 o'clock, what does the person do? They have a cup of tea and a croissant, a cup of tea and a muffin, a cup of coffee maybe, and a sandwich. Comes in, pyloric sphincter says, quick, shut the gate, something's just come in, and it's not broken down. Because this pyloric sphincter has sensors. So this, in this warm environment, what's happening with that? Starts to ferment a bit. Eventually this is broken down a little bit more, comes down, joins this, pyloric sphincter opens, and then it's 12 o'clock. What does the person have now? Lunch. Shut the gate, something's just come in and it's not broken down. Can you see what's happening? And this explains why 8 hours later there can still be some breakfast in the stomach. That's why we should eat our meal and then just leave it. Just leave it. My husband said to me one day, he said, I had a 2-hour job to do this morning. He said, it's 8 hours later and I still haven't done it. Because I got a phone call, then someone knocked on the door, and then someone else knocked on the door, and someone had to tell me this, and what's happening to his 2-hour job? So that's exactly what happens in the stomach. It keeps getting interrupted. You want happy children, don't give them snacks. Now, they might be happy when they get their snack, but what's going to happen half an hour later? You can have irritable children because their poor stomach is irritating them. And when our stomach's irritated, how's our mood? The whole body can be irritated. That is true. Our vagus nerve, which connects with the nervous system all through the body, gets irritated. I found that when I didn't give my children snacks, they ate a better meal the next meal, and they were much happier children. In fact, I remember my daughter Emma, at the age of 6, she didn't talk for 6 months. She sang. Everything she said was song. Mother, what's for lunch today? You know, children should be happy. If they're not happy, you've got to put the detective hat on and find out why. Is it because they're going to bed too late? Is it because they're dehydrated? Is it because their poor little stomachs are just being overworked? There's always a reason. So looking at the 5 things that cause the food to be still in the stomach 8 hours later, another one was if he was stressed, if he was annoyed, irritated, the food just didn't digest. I think we all know that one. And the only time really that Alexis St. Martin got annoyed with Dr. Beaumont putting things in and out of his stomach is if he had alcohol. Alcohol was something else that delayed digestion. And when I look at a lot of our guests that come to our retreat, you can just about tick every box. No wonder their digestion is not working well. There's only one food that's broken down in the stomach, and that is protein. Hydrochloric acid not only connects with pepsinogen to release pepsin, hydrochloric acid is antifungal, it's antibacterial. So if any food comes into our mouth that happened, let's say someone made us a sandwich and they just patted the dog, Maybe there's a little parasite or something on their hand that you can't see. Maybe there's a little bit of bacteria. Maybe the food sat too long in a warm environment. And I know I was in Africa recently and the preacher preached a little bit longer than we all thought, and the food sat a little bit longer, and I had diarrhea the next morning. But I'm very glad, because I think that my hydrochloric acid dealt with it quite well. You know, vomiting and diarrhea is the express train of waste out of the body. But I'm so glad I didn't vomit. It's not a most pleasant thing to happen. But I was glad that the express train went through the other way. But your hydrochloric acid, if it's nice and strong, do you know you won't get food poisoning? Have a look at what dogs eat. They've got 10 times the hydrochloric acid. So hydrochloric acid is a very important part of our digestion. If one drop went on your skin, it would burn a hole in your skin. And that's why we must keep well hydrated so that we retain that nice thick mucosa wall on the lining of the stomach. We had a man attend our program from South Africa. And I'll draw stomach again to illustrate what happened with this man. And this man did not want to be at our health retreat. Now that is rare. Most people say, oh, I've been trying to get here for years. This man did not want to be there. His arms were folded and he sat there. His wife had paid the full amount, so that's why he came. Every question I asked, it was just yes, no. I said, do you drink water? He said, yes. I said, how much? 2 litres? I didn't push it because he was not very happy. I said, do you have any health issues? He said, yes, I've got pain in my stomach. I've had pain in my stomach for 25 years. The man was in his 50s. He said, I've gone all over the world. I've still got this pain. I said, do you want any medication? He said, yes. A breath test showed that I have Helicobacter pylori in my stomach. And he said, every month I have an antibiotic to kill the Helicobacter pylori in my stomach. I said, how long have you been on this program? He said, this is my 4th month. What's the definition of insanity? To do what you've always done and expect different results. I am not criticising this man. He's gone to the experts to get help. And I think he's just hoping that the next antibiotic might kill it. Well, the fact is, the antibiotics were killing the Helicobacter pylori, but because he didn't assess the cause, more had come along. I said, are you interested in stopping your medication? He said, no, I'm very happy with my medication. Thank you very much. Now, what is God's government based on? Freedom. And what's freedom based on? Free choice. Please never forget this. Whenever mandates came in, what are those mandates done? Taken away your free choice. It's your God-given right to choose what goes in your body or what does not go in your body. So I totally respected his choice. That night, I talked about this incredible body that we live in and its inbuilt ability to heal itself. At the end of the lecture, he and his wife came up to me and said, that made so much sense. We actually want to ask you what you think we should do. I said, well, I can't tell you what to do with your medication. I have no authority over your medication, only you and your doctor do. But if I were you, I'd stop. And I'll give you a herb. I gave him slippery elm. His wife also had the same condition. At the end of the week, I had a very happy man in front of me. He said, no pain for 2 days. First time in 25 years. Wow. But what he said to me next made me even happier. He said, I've worked out the problem. See, you're the doctor. This is the mirror. It is our God-given right to choose what we do to our body. And that's why he said, I'm very happy with my medication. I totally respected his choice. Just as I am happy for him to totally reject my choice on what I do to my body. I said, what's the problem? He said, I was drinking 1 litre of water with every meal. So let me show you what was happening. Because he was drinking no water between meals, he did not have this nice thick mucosa wall. He had a very thin mucosa wall. And in that thick mucosa wall, there's sodium bicarbonate. It's designed so that if any stomach acid comes in, it immediately neutralises it, thus protecting the lining of the stomach. In a dehydrated state, this thick mucosa wall is very thin. There's no sodium bicarbonate in there, and so stomach acid can easily chomp little holes in the lining of the wall. In our body, and we looked at this in the first night, in our body we have microbes, 10 times more microbes in the body than any cell. And we have 100 trillion cells, 10 times more microorganisms in the gastrointestinal tract than anywhere else in the body. And whenever cell damage happens, these little microorganisms change roles and become the clean-up team and start cleaning up the waste from the cell damage. It's called Helicobacter pylori. Now, when this man began to eat, hydrochloric acid's released. And hydrochloric acid, what's one of its roles? Antibacterial. And hydrochloric acid's about to come down and wipe these guys out, and then what does the man do? We need a nice blue for this. He drinks a big glass of water. And what does that do to hydrochloric acid? Weakens it. And Helicobacter pylori goes, whew, that was close. Chomp, chomp, chomp. And every month when he has an antibiotic, it kills the Helicobacter pylori. But because there's still damage there, more Helicobacter pylori come along and start chomping. It's like cutting your hand and putting a Band-Aid on, cutting it again, just putting another Band-Aid on. It doesn't make any sense. So what he discovered was that he was drinking at the wrong time. And what he discovered is that if he drank before the meal, he did not need to drink with the meal. And many people are just so busy all the daytime. Sit down to eat, oh, I forgot to drink. And they drink with the meal. So because he didn't drink with his meal, hydrochloric acid stayed nice and strong. Hydrochloric acid came down, wipe out, wipe out. And because he was drinking between his meals, he developed a nice thick mucosa lining to the stomach. And before he went to bed every night, we gave him slippery elm, which put a lovely soothing coating on his stomach. His body healed itself when it was given the right conditions. Isn't it great when it's that simple? It's not always that simple. But we had a very happy man there. In fact, you could not wipe the smile off his face. He was a wealthy businessman. He had spent a lot of money. And he came to this little health retreat in the back hills of Australia and learnt about just drinking at the right time, not with the meals. Nice if it's that simple. So the protein is the only food that is broken down in the stomach. And this is a surprise to most people. So now, when the food's broken down to the right state, it comes through the pyloric sphincter into the first part of the small intestine, which is called the duodenum. And the duodenum is a very busy place regarding digestion. And the duodenum is alkaline. The only part in the body that should be acid is the stomach. Now, what's coming into the duodenum is mixed with stomach acid, so it's quite acid. And so the pancreas, his pancreas here, it releases into the duodenum and it releases sodium bicarbonate. And the sodium bicarbonate neutralises quite quickly that area to produce an alkaline environment. Put that down a bit further. Something else is happening in the duodenum, and that is the liver. The liver is the largest internal organ, and underneath the liver there's a little pouch. It's called the gallbladder. It's the liver that makes bile, but the gallbladder is a reservoir for bile. So it's just easier to write liver, so we'll write liver here, and the liver releases bile, and it is bile that breaks down polyunsaturated fats. Now remember, it's the saturated fats that have their breakdown in the mouth under the action of lingual lipase. But the polyunsaturated fats, which are in many nuts and seeds, its breakdown begins in the duodenum under the action of bile. The pancreas, it releases pancreatic lipase, and pancreatic lipase further breaks down the polyunsaturated fats. The pancreas also releases pancreatic amylase. Now, do you remember salivary amylase? Salivary amylase is ptyalin. So starch digestion began in the mouth. When it came into the stomach, it was put on hold in that acid environment, and then it came through into the duodenum, and with the release of sodium bicarbonate, we create the alkaline environment. Pancreas releases pancreatic amylase, and that finalises starch digestion. But there's more. The pancreas also releases trypsin. And trypsin is the enzyme that finalises protein digestion. Do you remember where protein digestion began? It began in the stomach under the action of pepsin, but it's finalised in the duodenum under the action of trypsin and chymotrypsin, which is another type of trypsin, also finalises protein digestion. So students, which organ is the main organ of digestion? It's the pancreas. It's the pancreas. So when someone has pancreatic cancer or disease of the pancreas, you will find that they die very quickly, and they die from malnutrition because they cannot finalise fat, starch or protein digestion. And we have seen that a lot. It's very hard to turn pancreatic cancer around because it's the main organ of digestion. And yet it's not often thought about as an organ of digestion. It's more thought about in the area of diabetes. You see, it releases two hormones into the blood, that's insulin and glucagon, but it releases 4 main enzymes into the gut to finalise digestion and sodium bicarbonate. So it's a very busy organ. So if you were to have a look at the hot spot in digestion, it would be in the duodenum, because this is where all of these are finalised. So let me show you something that's happening, and unfortunately happening quite often. This is protein. And in the stomach, under the action of pepsin, protein is broken down to peptides and polypeptides. And then it comes down into the duodenum, and under the action of trypsin and chymotrypsin, it's broken down to amino acids and peptides and amino acids and the peptides down to amino acids. Only as amino acids, singular structures, can it be absorbed out of the gut and into the blood. But some people are eating all day long, drinking with their meals, stressed. And so not all the protein can be broken down to peptides and polypeptides. So some protein comes into the duodenum, and the pancreas says, "What are you doing here?" And protein says, "Sorry, but they're drinking with their meals. They're eating all day long. They're stressed out. So there was not enough pepsin to break us down." And pancreas says, "We'll do the best we can." And maybe it can only break the protein down to peptides and polypeptides. And after this area here, there's nowhere else it can be broken down. So it cannot be absorbed. And it comes into the colon, and the colon says, "What are you doing here?" And peptide and polypeptide said, "Sorry, but they're drinking with their meals. They're eating all day long. They're stressed out." And trypsin and trimotrypsin did the best they could. So colon has to create more bacteria to try and calm that down, and then the person has a lot of wind, a lot of bloating, a lot of air coming out of the back passage. Aha. Aha. And the person will never access that protein. Remember, we're a hollow tube. And if it's not broken down properly, it cannot be absorbed into the blood. That's when it becomes part of you or me. In Leviticus 17:11, the Bible says the life of the flesh is in the blood, because that's where our nutrients are carried. But if digestion isn't working well, you can be eating the best organic food on the planet, prepared in the best way, but if you're not chewing it properly, if you're not adhering to the basic laws of digestion, you may not even access that food. Halfway through the small intestine, so by the time we get down to about here, all the nutrients are absorbed. So all that's left after this area here is insoluble cellulose. So you'll see it in your fruits and vegetables. There's a lot of insoluble cellulose. And that's very important, as we will see when we get to the colon, to stimulate and to sweep that whole area. But before we move on from protein, the enzymes that break down protein are called proteolytic enzymes. And a proteolytic enzyme is pepsin because it breaks down protein. A proteolytic enzyme is trypsin and chymotrypsin. So we'll just say the trypsins, the trypsin family. But God, in his wisdom and mercy, has put some proteolytic enzymes in some foods. The core of the pineapple contains bromelain, and bromelain is a proteolytic enzyme. Now, the good news is you don't have to eat the core of a pineapple at every meal. But what I do when I peel and cut up a pineapple, I just slice the whole pineapple and I just cut it in little wedges, so every bit of pineapple you get, you're getting a tiny little bit of core. It's a bit heavy going to eat a whole core. But if every person that has a bit of pineapple has a little bit of core, they're just getting a little bit, and it's quite okay, even though it's tough. And also, you call it, we call it pawpaw. I think you call it papaya, yeah? So the papaya contains a proteolytic enzyme called papain. And you can buy tablets they're usually digestive enzymes, and you'll find that they contain bromelain and papain. And if someone has pancreatic problems, they must be on a digestive enzyme. to come in and help the pancreas to break down the protein. And now, students, we're coming to the grand finale of digestion. That incredible moment where your nutrients are absorbed into your blood. And the small intestines are lined with villi. Looks like this. And up the middle of those villi is a lacteal, part of the lymphatic system. And all over the villi, all through it, is a little blood capillary network. But there's more. Lining it is a thick turf wall made up of Lactobacillus acidophilus bifidus bacterium. So this is a covering made of what's often called healthy or friendly flora, combination of many bacteria, yeasts and funguses. Probably the most permanent and common are Lactobacillus acidophilus bifidus bacterium. All the others really are made from those two permanent ones. When we were in our mother's womb, our gut was sterile. We had no gut flora in our gut. And when we were born, we were literally covered with our mother's gut flora. And I was watching a documentary on the gut, and they were interviewing a obstetrician. He said, "We always thought God made a mistake putting the birth canal and the anus so close." To the point, he said, that when a woman was about to deliver or going into labour, we'd give her an enema to clean out the colon because we don't want that little baby going anywhere near there. Because when the baby comes out of the birth canal, well, the anus stretches open too. And the air coming out of there, when that baby's face hits the air and the baby goes, do you know what that gynecologist or that obstetrician, similar, he said, "We now know it's a perfect design." Because breathing in and swallowing that air that's coming out of the anus, that baby is breathing in the mother's gut flora. And for the first 3 days in the woman's breast, before the milk comes in, there is a thick yellow substance called colostrum. And that is also rich in those healthy microbes. I was talking to a farmer. He said, if we have a cow that dies in giving birth to the calf, he said, we may as well put that calf down because if it doesn't get that colostrum, it will never be any good. It will always be weak. He said, if the cows just died, we squeeze those teats just so that that baby calf is getting some of that colostrum. He said, we can save that calf if we can put it on another cow that's just had a baby. Now let's take that to humans. How important that the human get those first 3 days. A man rang me up from a maternity hospital. He said, Barbara, can you help me? He said, it's 2 days now. My wife's milk hasn't come in. I said, are you in a maternity hospital? He said, yeah. I said, haven't they told you? The milk doesn't come for 3 days. But keep that baby on that breast because the baby needs that colostrum because did you know that this gut flora plays a major role in your immune system? Because through mostly in your large intestine, a little bit in your small, there are Peyer's patches. And the Peyer's patches are lymphatic organs where your lymphocytes, a major part of your immune system, your white blood cells, they live there and they're fed by the gut flora. It all connects. And they have found that babies born via cesarean section have more skin flora in their gut than gut flora because their first breath is up here where skin is. Notice what that obstetrician said. He said, we now know it's a perfect design. Once again, we know God makes no mistakes. So that gut flora is absolutely essential in digestion. So that gut flora is responsible for the final breakdown. Now, what do I mean by final breakdown? Because as we've just seen, there are enzymes that are living in your gut that are doing the breakdown. It causes, this gut flora causes a release of your B vitamins. That gut flora is responsible for the absorption of nutrients out of the gut and into the blood. This gut flora protects the blood against any harmful pathogens that may be in the gut. This gut flora nourishes the cells that line the gastrointestinal tract. How important is that gut flora? Hippocrates, called the father of medicine, he said all disease begins in the gut. But unfortunately today we are exposed to so many environmental poisons that can harm the gut. Now, the first part of our immune system in our gut is hydrochloric acid. Because remember what hydrochloric acid does? It kills off any harmful bacteria or fungus that may come in on the food. Well, let's say the person's drinking with their meals and eating all day long and the hydrochloric acid's low. Some bacteria might get through. Some fungus, yeast might get through. But God's got another line of defense, and that is the gut flora. And if the bacteria, the fungus, survived the hydrochloric acid, then the gut flora can wipe it out.
What happens to children who are C-section?
Pardon?
Well, they are not birth natural way, but the C-section.
If you have a C-section, what do you do?
If you have, and by the way, I was reading the report of a British obstetrician. He said 90% of C-sections are unnecessary. I was reading a story about a midwife in Auschwitz, because I love history. In 2 years, she delivered 3,000 babies, all live births. These women were suffering from severe malnutrition in the most horrific environments. She never lost a baby. Now, mind you, the babies didn't live long because of the conditions, but let's take that through today. Do you know what that means? Most women would be able to birth naturally. But one thing that stops it is fear. Isn't that true? Sorry, it's one of my favourite subjects. So what happens if a woman does have a C-section? What can you do to the baby? What a woman can do is she can get some natural probiotic and she can paint it on her nipple at the first feed every day. And that will help populate the flora in the gut. Unfortunately today, a lot of women are given breath tests, urine tests to find out if they've got strep B in their urine. And if they have strep B, they are told to take an antibiotic. Now, if a woman takes an antibiotic when she's pregnant, can you see that when her baby's born, she will be giving a compromised gut flora to her baby, because an antibiotic kills gut flora. It's a killer. And it doesn't discern between good and bad bacterias. Yes? What if you don't have a gallbladder? What if you don't have a gallbladder? The good news is it's your liver that makes the bile. So and we've got an amazing body that has ability to adapt and adjust. Pardon? Hepatitis. I've got some good news. The liver is a recoverable organ. Pancreatitis, if you've got pancreatitis, then it's very important you have those digestive enzymes to help your pancreas digest your food.
Why is it that when people have their gallbladder removed, they tend to have more IBS?
Why do people have more IBS when they have their gallbladder removed? The gallbladder has a purpose, that is true, and it doesn't function as well with digestion, but we're going to get to IBS in a minute, and you'll see that there are definite things you can do to prevent it and to heal it. We've seen people totally heal from irritable bowel syndrome. So back to the gut flora, what you will find, and I have seen this in just about every country I go to, every country has some form traditionally of cultured food as part of their diet. So through Asia it was kimchi, it was miso, and I've just been to Germany, sauerkraut. The cultured foods are yogurts, kefir. All of these foods are cultured foods, and those cultured foods help to maintain good gut flora. So what would kill it? What would kill gut flora? Let me just finish what I was saying about strep B. So if a mother says to me, Barbara, I've got strep B, I said, you know, probably most women have. When I had all my babies, I was never tested for strep B. Now, what mothers are told, if you don't take an antibiotic, your baby may go blind or your baby may die. Now, my daughter was talking to her midwife. You know what her midwife said? I have never seen a baby go blind and I have never seen a baby die. I've never heard of it myself either. And so this is a question that Tribunal gave to me. They said, Barbara, you tell women not to have... Well, I said, I don't tell any woman what to do. I just say what I would do. And they think that I'm very dangerous because I'm saying to women I wouldn't have it if I was picked up with strep B. And they said, they showed me a study where women got strep B. They were all given antibiotics in pregnancy, and it said it gave a 40% coverage. To me, that's still not... I still haven't seen the baby that dies or goes blind from the mother having strep B. But can you see a lot of people make decisions on something we should never make decisions on, and that's fear. And natural medicine is based on faith. Absolutely, we need to give our body the right conditions. So I've said to some mothers, personally, it wouldn't bother me if it came out that I had strep B, because remember, we've got 10 times more microorganisms in our gut than anywhere else in our body. So these microorganisms are all through our body. It's like the Helicobacter pylori. It's only there because the conditions are favourable, because the person's dehydrated, the person's not drinking too much with their meals. There's always a reason. So I say to women, if you want to be safe and you want to cover yourself, you can take olive leaf extract 3 times a day. You can have garlic 3 times a day. These are all natural so-called antibiotics that don't kill off our good gut flora. There's a lot of talk today about prebiotics as well as probiotics. So your probiotics are foods that contain the Lactobacillus acidophilus bifidus bacterium. So what's your prebiotic? Prebiotics really are just that indissolvable or indigestible fibre that comes in all your vegetables and your fruits. And that's what you pass when you go to the toilet every day. You can't digest it, but it plays a very important role of stimulating movement through the colon, but also feeding the probiotics. So you don't necessarily have to take a prebiotic supplement, just eat your fruits and your vegetables. What would kill off the good gut flora? Antibiotics do a good job. That's why if someone has to have antibiotics for some reason, they should go on a probiotic supplement 3 months, at least 3 months, to repopulate what they lost with the antibiotic. And the best time to take the prebiotic is 3/4 of an hour before breakfast, because you want it to go through your pyloric sphincter and way down to where you need it. What also would kill off the healthy or the friendly bacteria, it's called, is your statin drugs. Knock it off. long-term painkiller use, knock it off. Refined sugar does a good job at feeding the yeasts so that they get out of control. See, with an antibiotic, because it is a mould waste, so it not only kills the good bacteria, but it feeds the yeast. So then you get like this candida or yeast outbreak. How many people take an antibiotic then get thrush? Because the antibiotic has killed the healthy bacteria and it's fed the yeast. It's all about balance. The body runs according to precision balance. So it's about getting the right balance back. And that's where your probiotics can play a role. Can you see what happens when you've got a compromise or a breakdown in your gut flora? Now you've got a compromise in your final breakdown. You've got a compromise in what's getting absorbed. You've lost your protection. And one way that inflammation happens in the body is you've lost your protection and harmful pathogens can get into the blood, and that stimulates the immune system to fight that, and that increases your inflammation. Lectins, you've probably heard of lectins. Lectins, if we've got a good gut flora, the lectins can't even get into the blood. Lectins are high in unripe fruit, and when the fruit ripens, there's no more lectins in them. Yes, they're in legumes, but if you soak and rinse and pressure cook your legumes, no lectins. Yes, it's in grain, but if the grain is cooked long and slow or made into sourdough bread, that negates the lectins, so that we're getting back again to the traditional correct way of preparing food makes very low lectins. If lectins get into the blood, they stimulate inflammation. But if you prepare your food properly, you eat right, you have good gut flora, there's no need to fear the lectins. And so now all that's left in this last part of the small intestine is the insoluble cellulose or fibre. And right down the bottom we come to the ileocecal valve. This is a double-layered valve. It doesn't want anything to go back. And what comes out of the small intestine into the large intestine is mostly liquid. One of the main functions of the large colon is to take water out so that the stools are formed. And if a person's dehydrated, more water gets taken out than should be taken out. But here's a little organ down the bottom here called the appendix. And God never makes mistakes. And the appendix is not a mistake. The appendix has two main roles. One is, it's called the colon's oil can. So it lubricates the contents so that it passes through with greater ease. But it also releases antibacterial fluid. So if what's coming out of the small intestine is toxic, why would it be toxic? When vegetables break down, when plant foods break down, it breaks down under the action of fermentation. And the fumes from fermentation aren't really toxic. But when meat breaks down, it putrefies. And the fumes from that process are toxic. And so if a person's on a high meat diet, having a lot of alcohol and sugar with that, can you imagine what's coming out of here? It's pretty bad. Dogs, they don't have a 10-metre long digestive tract. They have a 1 metre long, or on your scale it would be 1 yard, yeah? We're about 10 yards. So with dogs, it's in and out quick. I love compost bins. I have compost bins at my home, but I am never going to put dog or cat droppings in my compost bin. No, I'll go to the vegetarian animals, the cow and the horse, because the droppings from the dog, they're fairly putrid. Well, that's because that's what animal foods break down. It putrefies. And that's why Dr. Atkins on his diet, his patients had to eat 3 cups of vegetables a day. So all those vegetables, with their fermentation, that negates somewhat the putrefaction from the meat. So I know this guy recently, he got married, he's usually a vegetarian, he let his hair down, he had rich food, a lot of meat, a lot of alcohol. Well, he ended up with a burst appendix. His poor appendix had worked so hard with all this toxic food that was coming out of him. Not a nice place to end up on your honeymoon. And if that appendix bursts, that is potentially lethal, because bowel fluid going through your gut can basically poison you and kill you. See, this gastrointestinal tract, it's a sealed unit. And it needs to be a sealed unit. So let me tell you about B12, and this is an often misunderstood vitamin, but it's not really a vitamin, it's a bacteria. It's an airborne bacteria. So when you eat an apple off a tree, you're getting B12. It's an airborne bacteria. You eat a strawberry straight off the plant. You pick up your parsley and pick it up and put it on your food, you're getting some B12. You don't need much B12. So I'm going to give you an illustration with my hands. So we'll say this is B12. B12 is connected with an R protein in food. And when it gets into the stomach, hydrochloric acid releases the R protein from B12. So now we've got B12 floating by itself. And in the lining of the stomach, in those parietal glands that release hydrochloric acid, they release the intrinsic factor. So here's intrinsic factor. So intrinsic factor and B12, they float together all through the small intestine, and in the last part of the small intestine, intrinsic factor, B12 unite, and then they're absorbed into the enterohepatic circulation. Hepatic mean liver. And that circulation, it stays in there until it's needed by the body. So if your hydrochloric acid levels are low, then R protein and B12 can't be broken, so you won't ever get that B12. And if you're drinking with your meals, and if you're eating all day long and stressed with your meals, and your hydrochloric acid levels are low, so will your intrinsic factor levels be low. So you can see that people with low B12, it's usually because of a compromised digestion. And you can have no B12 in your diet for 30 years before you can show a deficiency, because it's constantly circulating. The problem with low B12 is usually insufficient digestion. And vegetarians and meat eaters alike can suffer from low B12. Dr. Neil Nedley, in his book, Proof Positive, he quotes the research in there that shows that B12 can be found not only in homegrown veggies and fruits straight from the garden, but also organically grown root vegetables contain B12. So someone on a plant-based diet can be getting adequate amounts of B12. Again, it's more to do with digestion, if the digestion's not working well. So now all we're left with as we come into the colon is the insoluble fibre, and it plays an important role, yes, to feed your healthy, your friendly bacteria, but also to stimulate peristalsis all the way through the gastrointestinal tract. And the colon has some main functions. One is to take water out so stools are formed, but also it stimulates movement. That's why in countries where they get colorectal cancer, it's usually in countries that are high meat eaters eating a refined diet. No fibre in meat and no fibre in all your refined foods. And Dr. Kellogg said 3 intakes of food a day should equal 3 evacuations a day. And this colon has a mind of its own, have you noticed? If it's going too much and you tell it to stop, it won't. And if it won't go when you tell it to go, it won't. What it needs is gentle stimulation. So how do we gently stimulate the colon? I've got a book at home, it's called The Second Brain, and it's talking about the colon. It's very important that we promptly answer nature's immediate call If we don't, we should panic. It's important to listen to the voices that are coming from your body. And if your body says go, you got to go. When your body says go, it's usually because this large part of the colon has filled up and there's pressure on the anus. But what God did was he put a little muscle in the last part of the colon that holds up that last part of the colon. And we're very glad of that, because if we feel to go and the plane's about to land and we can't, we can hold it. But the problem is that ability to hold it is used too often. And many people, they're on the phone to the friend and they don't want to go because they want to finish the conversation. Or they're maybe typing an email and I just want to finish typing this email. Or they're watching something and they don't want to leave, they want to keep watching. These are not crises, but many people use that ability to hold it and they don't go when they really should go. And then when the movie's finished or the phone call's finished or you've finished hoeing the garden, whatever it is, and then they go and sit and nothing comes. Have you noticed? That's because it's gone back into the last part of the colon. It can't stay there because it would weaken. It would weaken that anal sphincter to the point where you would have no control. So it's very important to promptly answer nature's immediate call. It's also very important to be eating a high-fibre diet. And you'll be getting adequate fibre as long as you're eating your fruits and vegetables every day, your legumes, your nuts, your seeds, your whole grains, great fibre in all of plant foods. It's also important to keep well hydrated, because if you're dehydrated, more water gets taken out of the colon than should be taken out. It's also important to exercise, because when you exercise every day, you stimulate blood supply to the colon, and when you exercise, you move the colon. Every step that you're taking, you're moving. Did you do your push-ups this morning? Pardon? I had a bit of an injury about a month ago and I found it hard to do push-ups. I did 30 this morning. I can do it again. Do you know, we're in training. We're in training for something more important than the Olympic Games. Isn't that true? It's for life. It's for life. And I want to enjoy my latter years. But how many people don't enjoy their latter years? Their body's weak. Their body's not strong. Remember, muscle knows no age. Whether you're 9 or 90, you can have strong muscles. Now, at 90, my muscles won't be what they were at 9, absolutely, but you can still have strong muscles, no matter what age, and it's all about use. So exercise not only stimulates blood supply to the colon, but it also massages or moves the colon as you're walking. So the exercise is important. Position. What do I mean by position? Traditionally, in many countries and still today, people squat to do their daily evacuation. And so I'm going to draw a picture of what I mean and what happens. So when someone is sitting on the throne doing their daily evacuation, here they are sitting on the throne, puborectalis, which is that muscle at the end, it remains taut. Now things still get through, as you can see, but if the person sitting on the throne puts a little stool in the front of the throne so that they are mimicking the squatting position and their knees are up in the air, that causes puborectalis to relax. And when puborectalis relax, that causes the colon to open up so the contents pass with much greater ease. And you can go to Bed Bath & Beyond and buy a squatty potty. And squatty potty just sits around the toilet quite nicely. So when I was in Africa a month ago, some of the toilets I went into were just holes in the floor. It's all tiled, it's all flush, and just as well I'm used to squatting. And when I was in India, the last night I stayed in India, I was in a beautiful 3-story apartment with this family. I had my own bathroom, which was all pink marble, and the toilet was a hole in the floor. And science now shows us that it's actually the best way to do the daily evacuation, because when we squat or mimic the squatting position, puborectalis relaxes, which opens the colon, and you can pass with greater ease. But it does something else. It takes all pressure off the anus. Now, if someone hasn't gone for 24 hours and they sit and they decide to help things along a bit by putting a little bit of effort into it, all that does is put a huge amount of effort on or pressure I should say, on the anus, which can produce hemorrhoids, and they are very uncomfortable things to have. When I used to work in the operating theatre, I remember we did a hemorrhoidectomy one day, and all they do is put a suture or stitch around the neck and cut. And how's that person going to feel when they wake up? How are they going to feel when it's time to do their first bowel movement? Torture's alive and well. And so they're given painkillers. And what do painkillers do to the colon? Constipate. So then we've got more pressure on there at all, not a happy situation. But if you promptly answer nature's call, if you go when the body says go, and if you are drinking adequate water, and if you're on a plant-based diet and are exercising every day, then that will ensure that your colon is working well. But have you noticed that our cells have memory? And one lady said to me, I'm exercising every day, I'm on a plant-based diet, I'm drinking adequate water, but I'm still not going every day. So I thank God, and this is found in Psalm 104 verse 14, that he gave herbs for the service of man. So there is a herb mix that we have put together and we find very, very effective at gently stimulating peristalsis. The mix is 1 part Cascara sagrada and 2 parts licorice and 3 parts buckthorn. So the buckthorn and the cascara are bark, and the licorice is a root. Your bark, your berries and your roots all need a gentle simmer, whereas your flowers and your leaves, all you need to do is pour boiling water on. But when you're dealing with the roots and the barks, you need a gentle simmer. So these are bought as dried herbs, and they're mixed in that proportion in a jar. And then the recipe is 1 teaspoon. Rule of thumb with herbs is 1 teaspoon to 1 cup of water. And then this has a gentle simmer for 10 minutes. And we find that drinking a cup of that tea before the person goes to sleep at night, usually by morning, they're doing their daily evacuation. Part. So whether that be a teaspoon or a cup or a bucketful, you do it in that proportion. One lady told me, and she was a psychologist, she said, I go once a week with help. I said, we'll get you moving. And she required 3 cups of tea a day, 1 in the morning, 1 in the middle of the day, 1 in the evening. We also put a castor oil compress on her abdomen for several hours of the day. Tomorrow night, when we do natural remedies, I'll show you how to make that. Castor oil penetrates very deep and can help movement. At the same time, she started drinking more water. At the same time, she stopped drinking her coffee. This big dehydrator is the coffee. She also went on a plant-based diet, so she implemented those natural laws of health, which we had that cute little song about when we first started. And she, by the end of the week, her skin was not grey anymore. Her skin had become pink. The whites of her eyes had become really white. She said, I can't believe how clear my mind is. She said, maybe this is the problem with most of my patients. What was she, a psychologist? I wonder. She emailed me back 4 months later. She said, let me tell you what I did. She said, at first I had to have 3 cups of tea a day to go twice a day. She said, after 6 weeks, I started going 4 times a day, so I brought it back to 2 cups a day. She said, after 6 weeks, I started going 4 times a day, so I brought it back to 1 cup a day. She said, after 6 weeks, I started going 4 times a day. She said, I have to tell you, I take no tea now. This is 4 months. See, what she had to do, she had to retrain the cells. But notice what else she did. She changed her diet. She started drinking more water. She started exercising. She started doing everything that the body needed to be able to start going as it should. But what about the other end of the scale, which is diarrhea? What about irritable bowel, Crohn's disease, colitis, gastritis, ulcerative colitis? These are all inflammation, often in different parts of the colon, of the large intestine, but the same treatment they all respond to. And I have found that there are certain foods that are like kerosene to the fire on an irritated colon. So let me introduce you to the 5 allergens: wheat, dairy, and oats, peanuts, and refined sugar. I find that these foods must stop if someone has any irritation in the gastrointestinal tract. And the herb that we use is the slippery elm. Slippery elm coats, soothes and heals the lining of the gastrointestinal tract. If someone's going 10 times a day, they can take that every 2 hours. As they slow down, they can ease back to maybe every 4 hours. You're the doctor, you're the guide. Listen to the body, what it responds to, that's what you do. So let me tell you about a man who came to our retreat. And he didn't really want to be at our retreat. He only came because his wife wanted to come and he said he would support her. And I said to him, "Do you want any medication?" He said, he was late 60s. He said, "Yes, I'm on anti-inflammatories and I'm on prednisone." He said, "I'm on cortisone because I have irritable bowel." I said, "Oh." I said, "How long have you been on that medication?" He said, 10 years. Is it working? And recently the doctor said, "I can do no more for you." I said, tell me what you eat in a day." He said, I have coffee with milk and sugar every morning and toast." He said, "For lunch, I have more coffee and milk and sugar." And he said, "I have sandwich with ham and cheese. Cheese is a shocker for the colon. And my wife makes these lovely sugar biscuits. I said, what do you have of an evening? He said, have a big steak, and he said pasta or bread, and then ice cream for dessert, and coffee, and a couple of Jack Daniels. So at Misty Mountain Health Retreat, we don't serve any of that. I said, can I try something with you? He said, please, I've got nothing to lose. So I put him on slippery elm 4 times a day. And the last time was just before he went to bed at night. And he told me that he exercises every day. He lives in Port Macquarie, which is a coastal town where our nearest airport is. It's an hour and a half from us. But it's got this lovely walk along the coast. And he said, I know where every toilet is, because he said, I've got to go 4 times in that half hour in my morning walk. Well, at the end of the first day, he said to me, it's really interesting, I've stopped bleeding from the colon. At the end of the second day, he said, I'm not cramping anymore. He said, I've gone from 6 times a day to 3 times a day. Now, that's in 48 hours. That's stopping this and taking the slippery elm. He was excited. What's his body saying to him? Yes. So you've got to listen. By Wednesday, I said to him, I can't tell you what to do regarding your medication, but I said, if I were you, I'd stop your anti-inflammatories now. The fact that there was no more cramping, no more bleeding, no more pain, and his stools were starting to firm. He was bleeding, cramping, terrible diarrhea on all that medication. So he stopped his anti-inflammatories. Now, if he had started to go get diarrhea again, he's got a choice. Go back on the anti-inflammatories or go back on half dose, or start taking this every 2 hours, every hour even. That's what I do. He stopped his anti-inflammatories, no response. No negative response. He was excited. In fact, on the last day, he came running up to me, because Michael and I usually join our guests for breakfast on the last day. He said, I've just been on a morning walk and I haven't gone. He was beaming. This is in 1 week. How quickly the colon responds when you give it the right conditions. You see, the only thing that's touching the colon is what we're eating. And I do find when the gut is very inflamed, they cannot handle raw food. When you cook food, you soften the fibre. This is not forever. And the body, let the body tell you. Sometimes avocado can be taken. If avocado can't be taken, don't take it. Whatever the body says, you know what you say? I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you. That's what you say. Do I have to tell that man to change his diet? I don't have to say a word. What's God's government based on? Freedom. What's freedom based on? Free choice. And if that man says to me, cute, nice, but I really like my Jack Daniels, you know what I say? Okay. It's his life. But I didn't have to say a word, because that, remember what the doctor had just said? I can do no more for you. And he's getting results. In 1 week, he's getting results. I believe that God blesses when we start to give the body the right ways. He blesses the herbs and the natural treatments. He was a very excited man. I've even seen people say, I'm going back to work. I thought I was retiring with another 20 years of pain and suffering. Another person on a similar situation, we've seen this happen quite a few times, he was on 20 milligrams of cortisone. Every 2 weeks, he dropped 5 milligrams. And within 3 months, he was even off his cortisone. That's something you can't stop straight away. And he was told he would never be off it. He was excited. Does that mean he can never eat this again? Who will tell him? His body. It's quite possible when his body heals, he can have a little bit now and then. I don't know. Maybe he can never have that again. I don't know. The body will tell you. But when the body's been inflamed in the gut for a long time, it doesn't get better overnight. But hey, look at the results we're getting in only a week. That's why you must listen. One lady said to me, Barbara, I get a reaction every time I eat strawberries. What do I do? Don't eat strawberries. Next question. But I like strawberries. I said, the choice is yours. The choice is yours. But do you know, one day the Bible says Jesus will come again. And you know what? We're all going to get new bodies. That's when we'll be totally cured. But until then, I thank God that there are ways that you can give the body the conditions so that you can manage. And sometimes the abuse has been long, and I do understand with many people they did not know. It was like this man. His eyes were opened. He had no idea that food and the alcohol and the caffeine and the sugar had anything to do with his irritable bowel. But his eyes were opened. He could just about start his own gastrointestinal clinic now, because he has got the most important qualifications. What are they? You've actually done it. You've actually conquered it in your own life. There's no better story than that. What about hemorrhoids? What can you do for hemorrhoids? Well, the first thing, we look at why. And often it's constipation. So you've got to get over to the plant-based diet. You've got to get over and get those bowels starting to move regularly. And that takes all the pressure off here. And you can make some suppositories. And these suppositories can be inserted before you go to sleep. And one is you can make half coconut oil, beauty of coconut oil. You put it in the fridge, it goes nice and solid, then it's easy to make a suppository out of. And half castor oil. To make this, you will need to melt the coconut oil to mix it with the castor oil. And what some people do, and I think this is an easy thing to do, they're called disposable gloves, yeah? And you pour this mix into the disposal gloves and tighten it off here. You can put it in the freezer and then cut them off when they're solid and peel them, and there's your suppository, perfect size. And then when you do your daily evacuation in the morning, of course it comes away. The castor oil penetrates deeper than any other oil, and it soothes the area. And that's the castor oil. And the coconut oil, of course, when it's put in the fridge, it goes solid, which you've now got a suppository that's workable. And tomorrow night we're going to be looking a bit at natural treatments, but I'll mention one that is particularly helpful for any colon problem, whether it be irritable bowel or whether it be constipation or whether it be hemorrhoids, and that is sitting. Sitting in a bucket of hot water. Well, it'll have to be a big tub. Sitting in hot water for 3 minutes. You'll need 2 tubs, and then you sit in the cold water, nice and cold. The colder the better. So this one's very happy, and this one's a bit shocked. So this is hot for 3 minutes, cold for 30 seconds. And that's usually done 3 times. We're about to have a break, but I'm going to end with one story. We had a young man attend our program, 15, and it was the last resort sending him to us. He was having accidents in the classroom with bowel some of his bowel contents coming out. Can you imagine how embarrassing that is for a 15-year-old boy? Now that told me two things, especially when he told me if he had constipation, he'd have no accidents. But if he had diarrhea, he'd have accident. So that told me there's a problem in the colon, because we shouldn't have sometimes constipation, sometimes diarrhea. And he really had irritable bowel, so we changed the food, gave him slippery elm. And it also told me his anal sphincter, there's something wrong there if it cannot hold the contents of his bowel. He'd already had one operation. You don't want an operation on that area. And they didn't want to do another one. The first one didn't work. So he was sent to us. So we did sitz baths twice a day. Sitting in hot, sitting in cold, 3 times. What's that? That's what, 15 minutes, not long. He had no accidents at our place because he had no diarrhea. He was very happy. And I said to him, when you go home, because he's 15, you've got to make a reachable program. He's going to school. I said, when you go home, just do it of an evening. Only takes 15 minutes. He's about the same size as me, so it'd be easy to find tubs for me to sit in because I'm little. And I said, just do it before you shower at night. Because how's he going to do it in the morning? He's got to get up, go to school, have breakfast. And I said, do it for 30 days, non-stop. Because of cell memory, every time you do it, it's more powerful than your previous one. It's called sitz bath, which is German for sit. I didn't hear anything else. Sometimes we don't hear. 2 years later, that was 3 years later, because he was 18. His friend, nephew or niece came. She said, have you heard what happened to Tom? I said, no, we haven't. She said, he's totally cured. Totally cured. No more problems. He's only 15. This is his whole life ahead of him. What did the sitz baths do? The sitz baths brought an incredible amount of blood to the area. And when the blood comes to the area, the blood feeds the nerves. And the nerves and the blood are feeding that anal sphincter. Now imagine that anal sphincter in hot water and then sitting in cold. What does that anal sphincter do in the cold? It's totally healed by water. Just the simple alternating hot and cold of water. Tomorrow night, I'm going to give you the science behind why it is so powerful. But simply put, it just brings a dramatic amount of blood to the area. The blood is the life. The blood is the healer. The blood brings oxygen, brings water, brings nutrients. It's a powerful stimulator of healing in the body, and yet so quick. In the mid-1800s, every nurse learnt water therapy. Isn't that incredible? But as Ellen White says in the book Ministry of Healing, she says the use of natural remedies requires an amount of care and effort that many are not prepared to give. Isn't that true? But I give you a choice. Do what this young man was doing and try another operation and maybe another if they were prepared to do that. And how painful is it after you wake up from that operation? And then there's the painkillers, which constipate more, and then sitting in a bucket of hot and cold water every night for 30 nights. I can tell you what my choice would be. And at the same time, changing the food. As a young 15-year-old, he'd eat with his mates, you know, McDonald's, fast foods, and that's just feeding that irritable bowel. 3 times. So I mean, 15 minutes, that's nothing.
Can you apply that to the diabetic person?
We'll talk about that tomorrow night.
What about, can you tell about leaky gut?
Pardon? We talked about leaky gut, and the leaky gut was just the breakdown of that, the gut flora. So I guess people call that leaky gut because you've lost your gut flora, so you've compromised there. Yeah? Slippery elm is the powdered bark of the slippery elm tree. And so when you mix slippery elm in hot water, it goes thickish, almost like a soft jelly. And if it's too thick, just put a bit more water in it. The dosage is usually a teaspoon to a cup. But again, you play with that. My son liked it so thick you could eat it with a spoon. Some people like it a bit runnier, so I'll leave it up to you. The person's going 10 times a day to the toilet with terrible diarrhoea. You might take it every 2 hours. If that slows down, you bring it back, so you adjust your dose accordingly. What about a child? You give it to a child. My children were used to it. Whenever they got diarrhoea, they had slippery elm.
I think she was asking for the dosage for
You half dose. Child's half the size of a human, you halve the dose.
For the slippery elm, can you take the powder or should you make the tea out of it?
Yeah, you should make a tea because it'd be very hard to swallow it. It's fluffy powder. You can get it in capsules, but it's superior to make it into a tea, so it's coaty and soothing. And it is so dry, if you're dehydrated, it'll take a lot of your water out.
So it's better to take the tea or the capsule?
The tea? So it's 6 o'clock, in fact it's 7 past 6, so if we could have a break until 6:15, and when we come back we're going to look at the respiratory organs.